Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore. Today on the show we have Kwasi Adusei joining us. We get to talk about the Psychedelic Month of Service, which is a cool concept that Kwasi helped develop and is promoting through the Psychedelic Society of Western New York. And we get into some really cool conversation about that, why it's good to do service as a psychedelic club or organization. And it really helps bring down stigma and bring your local psychedelic community closer together. When you do service together, there is a bond that gets formed, and it really does help. We then get into some interesting conversation about race in psychedelics and actually some clinical stuff, because Kwasi is a registered nurse and is going for a doctorate of nursing program. We get into the specifics of that education program in the show. It's pretty awesome. We had a great time chatting with him and really can't wait to have him on the show again. So hope you enjoy it. If you want to hit us up, psychedelics email at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn. LinkedIn. It's a funny one. Now for some business. Kyle and I decided to run another book giveaway contest. We're giving away a ton of stuff here, and all you have to do is give us your email. You can sign up over at psychedelicstoday.com. It's called the Ultimate Psychedelic Book Giveaway. Probably close to $350 worth of stuff. So let me read off the list of stuff you can get here. Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, Dennis McKenna. LSD, My Problem Child, Reflections on Sacred Drugs, Mysticism, and Science by Albert Hoffman. The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide by Fadiman. P-Call, A Chemical Love Story by the Shulgins. Dirty Pictures about Sasha Shulgin. LSD, Doorway to the Numinous by Groff. Adventures of Self-Discovery by Groff. Healing Our Deepest Wounds. The Ultimate Journey, When the Impossible Happens, and Holotropic Breathwork, all by Groff. And that last one was co-written with his late wife, Christina. And you get a seat in our class, Navigating Psychedelics, Lessons on Self-Care and Integration. More on that soon. You also get a Psychedelics Today t-shirt and mug. Yeah, we're roughly guessing this is about $350 worth of stuff. If you want to sign up, check us out, psychedelicstoday.com, and you'll see the link for a giveaway. You'll see my face with holding some books. You just click that and you get there. The more you share, the more you increase your odds of winning. Some folks have shared it all over Reddit, YouTube, various forums they're in, and it really has increased their odds of winning. So you just, we'll email you a link after you sign up. You share that. The more people that sign up through your link, the more chances you get to win. The contest ends January 1, so make sure to get your entries into the contest before then. Best of luck. If you are interested in doing legal psilocybin mushroom work in Jamaica with an expert, you really want to go check out Eric Osborne. You can find him at mycomeditations.com. Coming up in late November, I think right after Thanksgiving, you can go down to Jamaica, work with him, and do some serious inner work on yourself. Mushrooms do allow really great access to your inner landscape, and doing it on the beach in a beautiful environment in Jamaica is a great spot to do it. I really do recommend Eric Osborne, and you should check out a couple of our past episodes with him if you want to get a feel for him personally. I really do appreciate what he's doing and can't wait to get down there. Coming up, this November retreat will feature Catherine McLean, PhD, and Shane Moss, the comedian. There's also another comedian, don't know the name, but you should check that one out on their site, because that could be really special. Catherine's going to bring a lot of information about psychedelic safety and integration practices. Shane is going to talk at length about his healing process and explorations through psychedelics. The last podcast we did with Shane, Eric helped us there. It was really fun because Shane got into a lot of the funny, great parts of psychedelics and also some of the scary parts. Having people that have that knowledge available to help guide you through this stuff is great. And Eric's been through, has been doing this for an incredible amount of time. So he's a pro. What's the thing? 20,000 hours. Yeah, whatever that rule is of you put in so many hours of practice to get to this expert level. He's at about, master level. So, you're probably going to want to check him out. If you don't want to go do ayahuasca in Peru your first time, maybe you want a shorter flight from the US or Europe and you don't really see the need to go upriver in a little boat, like maybe this is for you. Yeah, again, mycomeditations.com, and you can learn a lot more there, mycomeditations.com. If you have any questions about it, feel free to email us, psychedelicstoday, email@gmail.com. Hope you check it out. Today on Psychedelics Today, we have Kwasi Adusei from the Psychedelic Club of Buffalo. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
So the Psychedelic Society of Western New York.
Thank you. So the Psychedelic Society of Western New York. Yeah, Buffalo is a very specific spot. But it's cool to see how much you guys are doing like all over Western New York.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I actually started off as the Psychedelic Society of Buffalo. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as we did events in Buffalo at different festivals, people showed interest in having it closer to them. And so we essentially expanded, and now we have sort of a chapter in Buffalo, a chapter in Rochester, and then a chapter in Batavia. And then also in Niagara Falls now.
Oh, that's fantastic. And what's interesting to note, most people might not realize that you are actually really close to Toronto. So there's probably some cross communication there, and probably some really cool collaboration you guys are doing. Are you guys putting on events together at all?
So Bradley Foster, who runs the Toronto Psychedelic Society, we've been talking quite a bit. One of the things that we discussed was potentially doing a small-scale Zendo-style sort of training in Toronto, since we started that in Western New York, pretty much scaling down the Zendo model to festivals that, you know, are 3,000 people, 5,000 people, 6,000 people, as opposed to 20, 30, 40, 50. And so just kind of talking about the way that we did things, and how you can sort of adapt that model to something that's, you know, a little bit more relevant to the sizes of the festivals in their area.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, yeah, let's actually, before we get too deep on other stuff, talk about the Psychedelic Day month of service.
Sure.
Yeah, so you came up with this idea with a few others and are working to put it together. Can you tell us what the concept is?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started the Psychedelic Society of Buffalo / Western New York, you know, we ingrained community service into the model right off the bat. So I have a lot of background in community service. And so it seemed to just make sense to include service as in part of a psychedelic society. You know, when you ask the question, what would society look like if it were more psychedelic? You know, it'd probably be more giving, right? Probably be a little bit more generous of time and compassion. And so we started doing a lot of different things in the community, sort of breaking away from the typical educational events when it comes to psychedelics, and, you know, getting a little bit more hands-on, doing community cleanups, working at soup kitchens. And so what it's done for us in Western New York is it's sort of engaged us with the greater community, where we've been able to sort of come out as a group and not stay within this silo of psychedelic organization, but rather be able to get connected with, you know, other community organizations that have nothing to do with psychedelics necessarily. And so, you know, some of the events that we've been a part of, we've had the mayor come, you know, we've had, you know, the director of Journey's End Refugee Services come to one of our events when we did a fundraiser for them. And so it's put us in touch with, you know, the greater community in really positive ways. And it's been able to allow us to say, yeah, we're doing this for psychedelics, but we're doing something positive that means something to you. People, it really resonates with people. So the Global Psychedelic Month of Service, it was essentially adapting that idea and, you know, giving people a little bit of a nudge to say, hey, maybe try this out in your community, do something for your local community. Whether you're in Ireland or you're in Australia, you're in California, you know, there's a need in your community that requires some sort of attention. So as a psychedelic community, why don't you tackle it, right? And even if you're an individual, this is a great way to come out of the psychedelic closet, right? So maybe you're not an organizer, maybe you've never done anything in the psychedelic community, but you're looking for an opportunity to do that. What a great way to do this by volunteering at a soup kitchen and telling them, hey, I'm doing this for the Global Psychedelic Month of Service, right? I want to show a bit of a sort of commitment to the movement. And I want to be able to step out of my comfort zone a little bit and show people that people who do psychedelics, aren't bad people, right? So ultimately, the goal is transforming those feelings of interconnectedness that we get from the psychedelic experience into actions of connectedness.
I love it. When we met at Horizons and you're telling me about this, I was just like blown away that, I think it's a really great idea. And I don't really know too many people that are doing this, maybe besides like the MAPS Global Psychedelic Dinners. But I think the volunteering thing is so huge. And, I think you mentioned like, you could even go to a park and just do a park cleanup with a group of folks. And I was like, wow, this is such a great idea to like get the larger message out there, but also, help the community get involved. And I'm curious, what was the feedback like from like the mayor that attended? Was there like, wait, you guys are part of a psychedelic club? Like, what's going on here?
Well, it was interesting. So we went to a church. It was around Thanksgiving, and so this church was giving out toys and giving out free food to members of the community. And so we went down there to sort of offer a hand, and we helped out with serving the food. And there's a picture of it that I'll send to you later. So the mayor was, kind of doing his rounds, essentially. He is friends with the people who run this church. He's got a great connection with them as a community organization that does a lot for a lot of different people. And so it was an awesome opportunity to sort of talk a little bit about why we were there as volunteers. The city controller afterwards gave me his card and was interested in talking a little bit more about it, which sort of blew me away. And so I think it was awesome to not get a pushback and getting curiosity more than anything else, especially considering how taboo and how stigmatized this is. And that's also something that I've been very careful about too, is when I'm talking to people who are, in these positions of power, who are, executive directors of this or that, I never bring up the stigma. I just talk about what we're doing. I never say, we're doing this because psychedelics are stigmatized. We want to try to break. No, I just say psychedelics are something that's, have played very impactful roles in people's lives. The science behind it is amazing. What I'm finding is if I don't mention the stigma of psychedelics, I'm not putting the stigma of psychedelics in their head, right? You're just talking about the science of it. You're just talking about how meaningful it is. And people are going to be a little bit more receptive as opposed to saying, psychedelics are stigmatized, like it's got it bad. Don't say any of that because you're just reinforcing something that we don't need to be reinforcing. And so the response has been great. They've been less focused on the psychedelics themselves. It's always an opportunity for us to educate and talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it. They're really appreciative of just the work that we're putting into helping out our community.
That's awesome. Yeah. So can we talk a little bit about how this is going to work? So it's all throughout the month of November. And how would you suggest people getting involved? So there are a couple different ways. So there's different levels. The first level is you yourself want to volunteer. And so you can simply find a local organization. So volunteermatch.org is a great resource because you can put in your location, say where you are, if it's in, Grass Valley, California, or if you're in Denver, Colorado. It'll find some community resources that need help. So that's one way you do it. And then you can talk to a couple of your friends here and there and say, hey, we want to volunteer. We've got 3 or 4 people. What do you have for us? And then the organization will pretty much handle everything from there. Then there's the second way, which is sort of taking a little bit more leadership. Comparing this to the global psychedelic dinners, where MAPS had a call to action for people to organize events to fundraise for the MDMA study. It's the same idea. So organize events for your community. For me personally, it was the global psychedelic dinner that predicated the Psychedelic Society of Buffalo. So I saw the call to action for the psychedelic dinner. So I hosted it, huge outpouring of support. And so I started the Psychedelic Society shortly after. So with the same idea, you can do a global psychedelic month of service or an event for it, and then use that to sort of start a community around psychedelics. And so I've been giving my email out for people who are interested in doing that, so I can work with them a little bit on coming up with ideas that are, geographically specific, something that can cater to their specific needs. For example, I've been talking to a couple of people from New York City who are interested in it. And because of the, homelessness issue in New York City, we talked about how they can create homeless care packages that include things like socks and water, snacks, resources to food pantries and shelters, and then, do a drive for these items, bag them up, and then go out into the city and give them out. So there's different ways where we can work together to find something that's geographically specific. And then there's also being able to connect with a society in your area that's already doing this. And so when people email me, the first thing that I'll do is see if there's an area in their community who's taking part in it. If not, then we can, if they're interested in taking on some leadership, we can then, walk them through creating an event of their own. And if they're really just interested in getting involved on a small scale level, we can then walk through the process with that.
That's awesome. And you sent us a little flyer, and I see that you have some volunteer, like maybe guidelines or etiquette for it. Yep. So I guess maybe I'll just read it off since I have it up. Is that cool?
Sure.
So do not take pictures without consent of underprivileged populations. Avoid making this a selfie moment, which I think that is awesome. This is about supporting those less fortunate than us. If possible, take a picture of your volunteer group, either before or after the event. It is important to maintain the privacy of those we will serve, and be mindful that you are representing the global psychedelic community, so be respectful and professional. Awesome guidelines.
Right. Very important because, I think especially the selfie moment component of it, because there's sort of two sides to that. One, you do want to show people what you're doing. You do want to promote what you're doing, because part of this is, getting that word out there, coming out of the psychedelic closet, and then also showing that, psychedelic users are good people. I think the psychedelic experience imparts certain values on many of us. Values that include, taking better care of each other, taking better care of ourselves, taking better care of the planet. And so, in order to sort of help bring people into the cause, people need to see that it's happening. But then, the other side of that is, of course, not taking advantage of, the disadvantage, right? Not violating their privacy in any way. And then the professional component, showing a lot of respect to the organizations that you're doing this with. When I was in undergrad, I was part of a community service fraternity, and so a lot of these, principles kind of come from my experience with that. You want to, of course, develop good relationships and maintain those good relationships, and I think these volunteer etiquette guidelines are a really good way to do that.
Yeah. It's wonderful. I just really appreciate the selfie moment. I was watching all these YouTube videos last night, pranks and stuff like that. I'm like, wow, people do some really dumb shit and also really good stuff, but they do it for the likes, Right. It's like, oh, what can get me really out there, and what can I do for the likes? I'm like, man, that's kind of what we've come to as a culture with social media and all that. So yeah, I think that's really important to just do it for the better good of other people.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else you want to talk about? And I think, we're raising awareness for November, but I think people could do this not in November, yes. December, January, February, just continue to do it. But anything else you want to throw out there for this kind of campaign?
Sure. I mean, on that point, that's really the major thing. This month of service is essentially sort of a kickstart, just an opportunity to really get into it. But, just really encouraging that people continue to do it. Really encourage that people make this sort of a regular aspect of their lives. When it comes to community service in general, helping other people is can be an integral
component of being happy, right? Something that can actually make you feel good and make you feel good while you're making somebody else's life a little bit better, right? I think it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day struggles of life, and you sort of get stuck in this daily grind, and doing something for somebody else can break you out of that, sort of ground you, remind you of why you're doing the things that you're doing, make you appreciate the things that you have in your life, and then make you a little bit more empathetic, right? Mm-hmm. So these are sort of life skills that you can get from volunteering your time for somebody who has a little bit less than you, that's dealing with something that's a little bit more difficult than you are. So, I have plans of continuing these global service initiatives. I'm thinking about, I've been talking to people about for Earth Day, doing sort of a global psychedelic Earth Day cleanup, where we all find a park, a river, streets, a city street that's, particularly dirty and littered, and, take some time to clean that up for Earth Day. And so, in continuing these practices, not as sort of like a one day sort of thing, and showing your energy for it consistently, that's really how you're making changes. That's really how you're making impact. With November is a huge month of service because of Thanksgiving in the United States. And so it's a great opportunity to start there, but then of course continuing that onward. And, I think it's all part of the psychedelic integration, right? So we have all of these experiences where, life-changing mystical experiences, things that we've seen, things, messages that we get from the experience. And, at the end of the day, what are you doing with those, right? What are you doing with those insights, right? Are you just keeping those to yourself, or are you actually integrating it? And when you think about sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? When you get to that point of self-actualization, it includes not just having the insights, but actually making something of it, actually giving back to the community, giving back to the people around you, your family, your friends. And so, doing this community service thing, like, yes, please do it in the month of November, but continue doing it afterwards.
I don't know if you're aware, but some of the psychedelic clubs out here are actually raising funds for their own clubs by, this is a little tangential, but similar, by going out into public, for instance, like a concert venue or like a baseball game, and doing concessions. So you could put up your club name there, say like Psychedelic Club of Denver, for instance, and they're like, right, serving all these folks food and drinks and whatever. And I thought that was a really interesting way to go about it. It's been working well for them.
Yeah, I think it's important that we try to integrate psychedelic movement into mainstream society. In terms of getting people to accept the potential, the possibility of psychedelics becoming a part of our day-to-day lives. It takes exposure. You just have to be exposed to it, and so in doing these things, it brings that exposure out. We're living in a time where MDMA could be legalized in the next couple of years, and we're looking at all of these research articles coming out about LSD and psilocybin and the whole ayahuasca boom. I think that seeing these things on the internet is one thing, seeing them in your community is a whole different thing. So there needs to be that connection where we're not just reading these articles about it, but we're seeing people in our communities who are supportive of it, who've had those experiences, and who can speak for them firsthand.
Yeah, talking about integrating the psychedelic experience, do you have any, say, psychedelic values that you think like the psychedelic community, or like, I guess the experience can elicit? So, obviously maybe like a message that you get is to take care of the earth or take care of your body. So what are some psychedelic values do you think about, or what do you think psychedelic values are that we could integrate into the community?
Sure. So, the thing about psychedelics is, let's take DMT, for example, where you look at spaceships, right? We call it blasting off, right? And DMT, colloquially, we say you're blasting off, but you're blasting off into your mind, right? And so those values are going to be a person-to-person thing, and you'll see a whole lot of overlap, right? But for me, because of my experiences in life, family has been one of those values that has really been imprinted upon me. And so, I've had experiences where immediately afterwards, I'm like, I need to call my mom and tell her I love her, right? I've had those many, many times, right? Or sort of seeing, I remember one experience, my first experience in LSD, I remember looking at the trees and thinking that they had emotion in the way that they were swayed or the way that the wind was blowing through them. And it really made me empathetic towards trees and made me feel towards trees as opposed to just having trees be something in the background. And I really understood, that trees are life and the interconnectedness between trees and us. And so that made me a little bit more conscientious about the planet and doing things to give back to it. And so we've done a lot of cleanups because of that. And so for me, it's really been about being a better person. Those are, essentially the values that might be different from person to person, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to being a better person. I have, on sort of an existential standpoint where it's like, what is life? What are we doing here? What's the point of everything? You can have this sort of nihilistic point of view, you can think that nothing matters or whatever the case may be. But, Dan Harmon from Rick and Morty, he says it best, or you can have this nihilist attitude, but where does it get you, right? And so I think the psychedelic experience, it can facilitate a lot of these existential crises, right? But at the end of the day, it makes you realize that what you need to it makes you sort of reorient your focus and make you realize that things are important. And if nothing really matters, what are you going to spend your time on, right? And a lot of the time, it's going to come down to doing good for other people, right? Making the lives of other people a little bit easier, making the lives of the people who are close to you a little bit easier, and making your life a little bit easier too by reorganizing your focus. One of the biggest things I think is understanding the path to happiness, and the path to happiness is living in alignment with your values, right? And so for me, the psychedelic experience has shown me what my values are. It's really thrown it in my face and, made me feel like crap if I wasn't living in accordance to those values. And so I think it's important that people sort of reflect on these values, reflect on the values that they've gotten from their psychedelic experiences, and find ways that they can live in accordance to those values, right? To be a happy person.
Yeah, I love it. I remember, I think it was Dimitri Mujanis said one time, psychedelics just make me feel a little bit less of an asshole to people.
That's a good way to sum it up.
Yeah. If you get anything out of it, hopefully it makes you a little bit less of an asshole.
Yeah, there's something there. There is something there. It's like maybe you're just a little bit more aware of, that was a really shitty thing I just said. Mm-hmm. I would hate it if somebody said that to me. Yeah, yeah, so there's something there for sure.
Amplifies your emotional experience and forces you to focus on the things that you need to change and reminds you of things that you're doing right.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there a website or anything about the Psychedelic Day of Service that people can check out?
And so what they can do is they can go to the Toronto Psychedelic Society, put up sort of an email that we sent out through the Third Wave that includes directions for people who want to get involved. And so through that, it's got the graphic that you sort of looked at earlier with the volunteer etiquette, as well as some directions, and it's got an email on there too. And so that email will come to me if you're interested in being involved or you're not a part of a group. And then I can either, walk people through the process of organizing an event on their own or connecting them to an organization.
Cool. Yeah, we'll try to link to all that stuff in the show notes so people don't have to remember it or write it down. So let's dig into some fun stuff. We got to meet up very briefly in New York City at Horizons. And we just actually put out our Horizons episode this morning, kind of recapping some recordings we did on the scene. And it was really cool. I loved the event. It sounds like you also liked the event.
Yeah, it was great.
Good. Good. And the Duncan Trussell microdosing panel with all those folks is really, really cool too. Had you met Paul before, Paul Austin?
Paul Austin, yeah. So I worked with the Third Wave a little bit. So I met Paul at Psychedelic Science in Oakland this past April. So at the time he was doing a Find the Others campaign. And so he was pretty much doing a video of existing psychedelic societies to sort of spread that out and let people know that there are other people who support the things that they support, who are active in this field. And since then, we've been sort of working on a psychedelic storytelling project. So I started something called Psychonauts of the World, which, if you're familiar with Humans of New York, it's sort of a short form storytelling model where people talk about their psychedelic experiences. And so with the Third Wave, I do something called micro stories of microdosing, which is the same idea for microdosing experiences.
Mm. Well, that's really awesome. So I met him. Where did I meet him first? I actually forget. Probably Oakland at Psychedelic Science. He's a great guy. So yeah, he was on the panel. Catherine McLean was on the panel. Sophia Korb. Is it Sophie or Sophia Korb? Also Hamilton Morris from Vice. He does Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. It's really cool. I actually haven't watched any of those episodes. I've only seen like really short YouTube clips. But I'm a huge fan of Duncan Trussell. He is amazing, super funny. Kept talking about slurping back LSD. I was like, oh my God, who would talk about it like that? The slurping back Chiba Chews. I don't know if you guys have had Chiba Chews, but they are way too strong. So it was pretty funny. And yeah, it was just super cool because they were on couches in the middle of this circular audience. It was almost like it was set up like a boxing ring in a lot of ways, which I was nervous about, but it played out really nice. Everybody was nice to each other. So
yeah, it was great. It was awesome.
Super productive conversation. It sounds like everybody learned something. Maybe except for Hamilton. I think Hamilton knew everything already.
Yeah, way more. More than necessary.
But it was super funny. And then Shane Moss was great as an opener. Was it Shane was the opener?
Yeah.
Adam Strauss.
It was Adam, not Shane. Yes, thank you. The Mushroom Cure. He was super funny. I'd never seen any of his stuff before.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, so I don't know. What was like the best thing for you out of the whole Horizons and After Party thing?
So a couple of things. It was the second conference that I'd gone to in psychedelics. So the first one was, Psychedelic Science, which I was fortunate enough. I got a scholarship from MAPS to attend it.
Nice.
The Perspective Scholarship. And so they brought something like 18 to 20 people from around the world and funded their trips so that sort of underrepresented voices in psychedelics can be heard, which is something that I thought was amazing. And so, allowed me to connect with so many different people from all over the world who were doing this work. And so going to Horizons was sort of like an extension of that, a continuation of it, where at Psychedelics Science 2017, I got connected with people and we started working on different things, which include the Global Psychedelic Network, where, at Psychedelic Science 2017, we had a convening of all the psychedelic societies that were present. We sort of crafted a mission statement and talked about how we can sort of work together, pool our resources to make a true impact. And so out of that sort of came the Global Psychedelic Month of Service, right? Out of that also came the Psychonauts of the World. When we met at Horizons, we had an opportunity to meet with some of the psychedelic societies that were present and started to put together a guide for people who want to start psychedelic societies and don't really know how to start, where to start. So that was great to sort of like see the continuation of Psychedelic Science 2017 into Horizons and kind of put everything together. And then I think one of the things that stuck out too was the conversation, the last talk by Nick Powell, I believe.
Powers, I believe.
Nick Powers.
Nick Powers.
Yeah, we're working on getting him on the show. I can't wait to talk to him.
Amazing. everything that he said got a standing ovation.
The only standing ovation of the whole weekend.
Yeah, it was great. It was awesome. He brought up a lot of conversations that are becoming a little bit more pronounced in the psychedelic movement now. And he did it in a brilliant way and very articulate man. I think he was able to resonate with quite a bit of people.
I need to watch that. I actually, it's funny. I downloaded the new Spangle CD. I'm a huge Spangle fan, and I took Nick's video to put into our Horizon post, and it started playing on top of like the Spangle track, and so I was hearing like little bits in like history of like the drug war and this and that. I was like, man, Spangle really did really great thing here. And then I looked and I didn't realize that his talk was playing in the background, but I'm excited to go back and actually listen to it. I had to bounce on Sunday to catch a school call, so I missed it. But
it was pretty incredible. I think we should probably link that actually in this post for people who are interested, because it really was phenomenal and raised a lot of things. And Kwasi, you're uniquely qualified to resonate with what he's talking about, because I'm just a friggin' white kid from New Hampshire, and I live in like probably one of the whitest towns in Colorado. It's ridiculous. I went from like the whitest state to like one of the whitest towns in Colorado. And, I have no experience with diversity. I'll put that out there. But you grew up in the Bronx, you said?
Yep. So I grew up in the Bronx. I was born in Ghana, West Africa. Then lived in the Bronx for, through beginning of high school, about 13 years. Went to high school and then came to Buffalo for college.
When did your family move to the States?
My family moved. So my parents moved actually when I was about a year old.
Cool.
To Bronx, and came to pretty much make a life for us. I'm one of 8.
Oh wow.
So my parents came over. My aunt pretty much raised me for the first 6 years of my life, and then I came over to the Bronx after that. Growing up in the Bronx, psychedelics, I think all drugs are just grouped into one area, right? It could be crack or it could be LSD, but it's all the same thing, right? So, we talk about the stigma of psychedelics. Well, it's 10 or 20 times worse in the inner city.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's a good point. There's no real differentiation. At least from what I've seen from TV. I don't have the experience in person, but
no, there isn't at all. One of the things that I think about too is like, because that question has been coming up a lot, is like, how do we make the psychedelic movement more diverse? And that's such a complicated process, because it's not that psychedelics are not inclusive. It's that the communities where, multicultural people are living, the communities where that diversity is, psychedelics are not going to be a priority, right? So going back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you're going into these inner cities, you're still worried about food and shelter, right? Mm-hmm. Self-actualization is all the way at the top. And so once you have an environment that's conducive, that provides safety and everything that you need, then you can move on to these experiences that, sort of tap you into a higher consciousness. But until you have the things that you need, that's just not going to be a priority. And so it's really a systematic issue and not necessarily an issue of psychedelics not being inclusive.
Right. Yeah. And I think Catherine McLean brought that up when we had her on the show talking about this topic. And she was like, yeah, how many people from like the inner cities can really take off of work to participate in a study like this? Right. Not too many people. I mean, it takes a lot of time. And if you can't like afford to do that, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I want to get into the psychedelic therapy. I think it would help a lot to have, somebody of color to be approaching people of color, and letting them know of their options. So I'm in clinicals right now, and I'm working in a mental health and substance abuse facility, And I've seen patients of color come in and, they talk about their symptoms of distress, PTSD or this or that. And, and this goes for everybody, not just, the patients of color, but it's kind of frustrating sometimes to sit there and like listen to the struggles that they're having, knowing that we have better solutions out there for them. But, even if these solutions were available to them, they still wouldn't be interested in doing it because of that massive stigma in, underprivileged communities. I remember during an assessment, there was a Puerto Rican woman who was talking about, her past experiences and her past, history of drug use and this and that is just part of a typical assessment, and the interviewer asked, have you ever done, she's naming off a bunch of different drugs, so marijuana, yes. Do you drink? Yes. Have you tried cocaine? Yes. Have you tried psychedelics? Oh, no, I would never do that. Are you crazy? Right. And so that's like the typical response you're going to get. So it's going to be really difficult to be like, hey, listen, we understand that you've got PTSD, but there's this amazing, amazing treatment out there that could help you. And in order to sort of convince them that this is something that they can actually benefit from, it would help if they're receiving that message from somebody who is also off color.
Mm-hmm. So, and just to give a background, you're a nurse and then you're also working on your doctorate of nursing, correct?
Yep. So I'm a nurse. I'm working on a psychiatric doctor of nursing practice, similar to a physician's assistant. And so it allows me to diagnose and prescribe medication for psychiatric patients. Mm-hmm. So, ultimately I wanted to practice psychedelic therapy. And I think, having a background in nursing is really integral to that because of the emphasis of compassion and trust and empathy that we're trained in nursing to have. I think really translates very well over into work with psychedelics. Mm-hmm. We're doing the harm reduction for our local festivals. A lot of that came into play. Although harm reduction isn't directive, it's not therapeutic. It still takes a lot of those sort of soft skills, right, of being able to approach people in soft ways, being able to approach people in non-threatening ways, and trying to make the most of your time. So,
I think we should talk about getting you trained up in breathwork too.
Yeah, I would love that. Absolutely.
Good.
That'd be great. I was talking to Kyle about that earlier.
Awesome. There's a lot to talk about here because psychedelic therapy is so heated. Like the world, like you're seeing it just like we're seeing it. There's so much, back and forth going, oh, you're doing it wrong, or no, just calm down. It's okay to do it wrong for a little bit. Then we can do it right. But then there's this risk of, a session. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I've heard this number of $10,000 for MDMA therapy. That could be the whole program, but that's still way out of reach of a lot of folks, especially given we don't know what insurance is going to cover or the federal government's going to cover. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like democratization of psychedelic therapy, like, being concerned about what might happen once legalization happens?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to take a whole lot of work from overhead. It's really going to take a whole lot of negotiation from the end of MAPS, and trying to make, trying to approach this in a very encompassing way that addresses a lot of these issues. I think a lot about the whole underground scene of psychedelics and how there are people who have access to these things without it necessarily being legal, and wondering if that might be like a great thing to have, because in terms of access, in terms of cost, etc., it's there, right? You're able to get to these medications. It's not legal though, and so that's of course a massive barrier. And so I think that's part of the conversations that kind of come about when we talk about how well will this be integrated in society. Is this going to be something that's looked at as sort of an optional treatment, and because it's optional, you have to pay, out the wazoo for it, right? Is this something that is going to be, again, just catered to people who have a ton of money, and, and being approached by people who are not of color is not going to be the only barrier to this? These are a lot of really difficult questions. I think that the way that MAPS is doing it is brilliant. The way I see it, in terms of policy changes, it has to either be through a financial initiative, which we're kind of seeing a lot with marijuana, where, sort of the medical components of marijuana is what started the legalization. But now that there's this huge financial initiative, you have all of these states who are kind of hopping on board. I don't know how much of that will happen with psychedelics, right? And so it might have to stick in this completely purely medical realm where hopefully psychedelics are then looked at we can use MDMA as an example, that it can be billed, and MDMA can be billed the same way that SSRIs are built, because we have the scientific evidence to prove that it's worthy of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really hoping that, I'm sure these are a lot of the questions that MAPS is asking, and their approach to working with the FDA, and approach to working with the government to make sure that once this is here, we can actually make use of it the way that we're making use of any other medication.
Right. Yeah, I feel like there's this 6-year window where they have a kind of, I guess it's literally like I hate to speak out of school, but it sounds like they're going to be able to say who can provide the therapy.
Right.
And we don't really know what that looks like yet. I don't know if the announcements have been made there.
And I think that's fair. When we look at different treatments, standard treatments for different things. Mm-hmm. So using PTSD, there's something called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
EMDR.
Or EMDR, yep. And so with EMDR, to be able to provide it, you have to go through a whole training process. Not anybody can just do EMDR, right? So I think it's good to have the same sort of stringent parameters for doing psychedelic therapy. Not everybody should be able to provide it unless they've already gone through the training of it. I remember one of the talks at the Horizons conference, somebody, the speaker was talking about how was questioning, should people who are providing psychedelic therapy have had psychedelic experiences, right? Should that be one of the training modalities for people who are going to be providing psychedelic therapy? Because, is that going to add to the therapeutic relationship at all? Is that going to, be objectively better for the patients and the clients than somebody who has no experience whatsoever? So, I think that although it makes it a little bit more difficult to get access to it, and giving psychedelic therapy the same sort of parameters, the same stringent parameters on it as any other medication, it gives it that much more sort of gravitas. It gives it that much more reliability. It just makes it a little bit more appealing, I think, too, to know that your therapist is somebody who's specifically trained to be able to do this for you.
Yeah, I definitely want somebody that's been trained if they were guiding me through a session. It would make me. I mean, you're seeing that in the ayahuasca movement where people are going down and taking ayahuasca with people that aren't trained, and it's a shit show.
Right.
And, there's a lot of psychological and physical damage that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that there's also the negative side of psychedelics too when it comes to treatment. I think we get caught in the conversation about how is this miracle cure, and it can be for a lot of people, but it can also make things worse for a lot of people. And the initial studies they were doing with LSD, they weren't targeting any specific mental health population. They were giving LSD to everybody. So you could have been a schizophrenic, you could have OCD, generalized anxiety disorder, depression, alcoholism. Let's just give it to them. Let's see what happens. For most of them, it made it worse, right? For most of them. And that's the reality of it. But, out of that, we saw that LSD was really beneficial for alcoholics. It was really, really meaningful for people with substance use disorders. And so, we always have to be very careful with the way that we're approaching things. And all this research, of course, is super necessary, because if those initial studies weren't done, we wouldn't have been able to see that, LSD might not be the best thing for schizophrenia, right? So, yeah, it's unfortunate people are going on to do these ayahuasca ceremonies, or, they might be hearing about how LSD or psilocybin is a miracle cure for this or that, and then they're trying it on their own without any guidance, without any professional oversight, and they're making things worse,
right? Which is why it is so important that we have this research to show who should be using these things, right? Where we can do a thorough family history and make sure that we're not putting you at harm like we would any other medication, right?
What's your take on, say, like the traditional use versus clinical use?
So I think that the clinical use is an avenue to expand access to traditional use, right? I think that's the way that because, again, using marijuana as an example, right? A plant, right? That we should all really have access to, but we don't because it's illegal. But because of medicinal uses, we were able to, use it if you have chronic back pain or, nausea from chemotherapy, and then eventually recreational, where now everybody's got access to it, the traditional use. So I think that's the same thing that's going to be happening with the LSD and psilocybin, MDMA, where, there's that traditional use happening on the underground, but in order to bring it out into the mainstream, to make it legal, it's going to have to go through the medicinal route first, where we can accept it as a culture, as a society, see the benefits of it, and then expand that into sort of a mainstream psychedelic use. Both have its benefits. I think that as somebody who would have severe PTSD, it's wonderful that they can have access to MDMA to cure them of that. But you could be also a healthy individual. You don't have really any major severe depression or anxiety issues, but you can still severely benefit from a psychedelic experience, right? It's not something that I think should be restricted to the medicinal use. I think the education is necessary so people are more aware of the risks that they're taking if they are using it in a more traditional setting. In college, I remember there was a kid who was in my dorm who was sober because he had a history of schizophrenia in his family. And so he just stayed away from everything, right? So having people aware of the risk that they're taking so they can do that, so they can know that psychedelics are not for them. So, if they want to use it traditionally, they can, but they know what the risk that they're taking. And they know how to use it properly, essentially. Yeah.
Great answer. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about that too, in regards to like training and whatnot. What does like a shamanic training look like versus like a clinical training? And it's interesting because like would we restrict some of these traditional, say, shamans or people that's been in their lineage for thousands of years? How would they get approved to do work with folks?
Which is really tough because totally different perspectives on it.
Yeah.
When it comes to shamanism, the whole idea is that the shaman is not the teacher. The shaman is holding space, right? They are the gateway essentially to the spirit realm. But once you're in there, it's up to the medicine to do the work. But then when it comes to traditional therapy, medicinal therapy, the psychologist is using cognitive behavioral therapy as an adjunct to the medication, right, or the medicine. So it's kind of like two different approaches.
Yeah.
Objectively, which one is better? I guess we'd have to look at research, right? That could be like a potential research initiative in the future. Once things are a little bit more out in the open, and we can see like is the shamanistic approach to it better or the same as the medicinal approach to it. I think, of course, when it comes to insurance things, you have to have these sort of, protocols and this and that you need to follow in order for it to meet the criteria for insurance reimbursement. So, that might have a lot to do with the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy and not just MDMA therapy, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I sometimes like to think about it like LSD and MDMA are very Western medicines versus like these naturally occurring like fungi or plants. So it's like I don't know, when I think about like the clinical use, I think, okay, like MDMA, maybe that fits in there because it's kind of part of that tradition.
Right.
Yeah.
True, fair point.
If we want to go a little far out, you could say, for instance, like everybody that's used a substance has kind of like tapped in part of their essence to it and is kind of almost permanently attached to that substance. So if you looked at the Ibogaine tradition, like everybody's there for thousands of years. Ayahuasca, you know, probably same thing for thousands of years. Mushrooms, same thing. LSD, you only got 60 years of baggage.
Right.
MDMA less, 2CB less. So, you know, you're dealing with more just you, as opposed to all this kind of cultural and potentially spiritual, transpersonal stuff that's bolted onto these molecules. Hard saying, not knowing, but you know, that's one way to look at it, and is a way some traditions look at this thing.
Right. I think it's also really interesting that like a lot of these psychedelics, they sort of take on the personalities of the cultures that they come from.
Yeah.
Right. And so with Mother Ayahuasca, you get these, you know, snake vibes, like this very like, you know, foresty. And then Ibogaine, you get these African spirits, you know. Just as a complete aside, I always found that very interesting.
Have you used Ibogaine?
Ibogaine, I have not. So Ibogaine and ayahuasca is on my list.
Okay. You got everything
Mostly
else.
ayahuasca. Ibogaine, maybe not.
Yeah, I'm like really questioning whether I would ever do Ibogaine. It seems so intense and not pleasant. And I'm like, you know, if I was addicted to opiates, and I was going to die, I would be like, okay,
Yes.
yeah, I'll do that one maybe. If I don't want to die, maybe I want to die. I don't know. But
Yeah, Ibogaine seems like something that you steer clear of unless you actually really, really need it.
yeah, I like the idea. It sounds like there's some really cool microdosing stuff happening with Ibogaine, which I might be inclined to try eventually.
I was talking to this guy who studied with the Bwiti, and he said over there they actually eat like microdoses of the root, and that's how it was like traditionally used, besides like the initiation rites and using it as like a rites of passage to like break you open. But he said they would use it, they would just take small doses and use it for work and whatnot.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember. I think it might have been Hamilton during the microdose conversation who mentioned that, you know, traditional uses of psychedelics are microdoses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we're taking it in the West, we're using it for like that breakthrough mystical experience, but that's not necessarily how it's been done for, you know, thousands of years. Just like really interesting, because I always thought the opposite. I always assumed that, you know, these traditional models of psychedelic usage, they're going way deeper than we are, right? Because it's ingrained in their tradition, therefore they're probably pursuing a little bit more of a deeper look into the mind that we might be comfortable with, right? But turns out it's the opposite.
Yeah.
I wanted to disagree with him there because I thought he painted with a little bit too broad of a brush. Like I know for sure he's right in some context. I just don't think it's like everyone.
Not everybody, right?
You know, he actually did say something that pissed me off. I don't know if you guys got this. So
know.
he like, oh man. So it's the Vice attitude. He's the embodiment of Vice. So like I love it, but I also like get bugged. You know, it's the way they always say shit about the United States. It was always this like shitty way of talking about Americans. And it's like all the time. It's like, if you're from the United States and doing ayahuasca, blah, 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 blah. It's like this diminutive thing about our country. And it's like, come on, guys, like, get it together. It's okay to be positive about ourselves. It's okay to like, you know, not try to encourage everybody to cut their wrists. Like we're an okay people working on the problem. We're not, there's a lot of problems here we're working on, but it's like, I don't know. That was just like a one thing he said at one point. If you're an American going to do ayahuasca, blah, 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 you know, I don't know. When people talk about the ayahuasca economy and Americans, I get a little bothered. Like, I get the point that we shouldn't, you know, we should do our best to leave, you know, very few footprints down there, a lot of trash, like do our best not to do that. And also, you know, hopefully contribute something to, you know, either indigenous people or to preserving the plants in some way. But, you know, beyond that, like, I don't really think you need to be too shitty. And it's kind of like, how would somebody coming from Los Angeles that saw ayahuasca in like a Jennifer Aniston movie, now they're going to Peru, like, how would they know to like how to not be shitty unless they're taught?
Right.
Like, you know, there's no context. You know, it's just another place on the planet. It's, you know, just an extension of Los Angeles, and you're gonna, you know, buy 10 million water bottles and leave shit everywhere and, you know, not contribute to the rainforest. But maybe you are aware. But I don't know. It's just something that gets me a little bent out of shape when people shit on Americans, because, you know, we're trying here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people aren't going to Peru for ayahuasca ceremonies to screw up their culture. They're going for spiritual healing. Right. I mean, when it's happening in mass, there may be consequences that we're not fully aware of, but it's not the intention to do that. And so, of course, it's an issue of access. Most people in the States just don't have access to something that could change their lives. And so if they need to go to South America to do this, that's just what you have to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's upon all of us to encourage new people in the field to understand some of these issues and to maybe even pressure some of the ayahuasca centers to include this in what they teach you. Maybe they need to know a little bit about eco stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, like when it comes to the resource limitations that might be occurring, I think this is something that was a theme at the Psychedelic Science Conference, where like the 5-MeO toad might be sort of a resource limitation when it comes to even the peyote cactus, how that's kind of dwindling down because of mainstreaming of psychedelics. Those are real issues that we do need to talk about and address and figure out how we can find solutions to them.
Cool. So we are at time. So Kwasi, do you want to give us some links so people can find more about you, the work you're doing, and this psychedelic month of service?
Sure. So if you're interested, you can email me at Kwasi at thethirdwave.co. If it's just something that sort of sparks your interest and you want to learn a little bit more, just send an email to that. Again, Toronto Psychedelic Society has put up, the image that explains the whole process. And so you can check out the Toronto Psychedelic Society's Facebook, and they'll have that up for you. One of the other things that I talked about a little bit, my thing is giving people opportunities to come out of the psychedelic closet. I think the more people that are out there who are, developers, software developers, doctors, nurses, just people who work at the post office, just anybody doing whatever you're doing. Just, I think it's so important that we just come out and say, I support psychedelics. I do them, and they've helped me. Right? Really, just that simple. I think that's going to be like a really important aspect of the movement as a whole. And so Psychonauts of the World is, sort of this Facebook campaign of sharing people's messages. It talks about people who used LSD to get off their heroin addictions and people who made major life changes based off of DMT experiences. And so if you want to check out facebook.com/Psychonauts of the World, and you're willing to share your story, that would be absolutely amazing too. So, I really want to thank you guys, Psychedelics Today, for having me.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an awesome conversation and really loving what you're doing. You're doing some amazing work in this community.
Odds are good you've been in a strange situation regarding somebody handing you some drug and you didn't know how to use it. Even if it was, you were 17 years old and somebody handed you a joint and you go, doesn't this make me go crazy? How do you level up your knowledge and get a handle on what drugs are safe, how to do drugs, how to know if this stuff is okay to do? Like, does LSD cause chromosome damage? That big lie from the 60s, 70s. And, it doesn't. So how do you clear these things up? Kyle and I developed a class, Navigating Psychedelics, and it is, consider it a 101, 102 of psychedelics. How to do them, how to be safe, how to make sure you and your friends don't go to prison or go to the hospital. And we walk you through a lot of that process. We do some live support through our secret and closed Facebook group. There's also the ability to communicate inside the course. We are going to start offering regular live check-ins, webinar check-ins to folks, and that can really help support the process. So far, the feedback has been tremendous. People are very excited about the class and are shocked at the amount of value we've thrown in there. We did a whole bunch of master classes with experts in particular sub aspects of psychedelics. The folks who are featured as masterclass teachers, Lenny Gibson, PhD, Elizabeth Gibson, those are both our breathwork teachers. Larry Norris from Erie, on integration, Paul Austin on microdosing, Shannon Claire Carlin, she works for MAP, she's great. Catherine McLean, PhD, Ashley Booth, MS, Neil Marshall Goldsmith, PhD, Mitchell Gomez, executive director of Dance Safe, Julie Megler, MSN, so she's a nurse practitioner that also works at Erie with Larry Norris. Dr. Richard Grossman, who's a acupuncturist, he's got a PhD on ayahuasca, light hearts and safety, we called that one. Ville-Marie Narlock from the Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Michelle Hobart, MS, Spiritual Emergence and Self-Care. Dr. Ingmar Gorman, clinical psychologist who works closely with Catherine McLean in New York. And that's it for now, but we're going to keep adding more. I think we're going to get one with Daniel McQueen soon, so keep an eye out for that. And I hope you have the opportunity to check it out. If you want to get better educated on psychedelics, this is a great way to start. Even if you've been around for a long time, you might have picked up some, hippie wisdom or something that might not necessarily be right. About brown acid or black acid or whatever. Kind of all just one molecule. You can test for that molecule and know that you've got a molecule. Maybe there's some side additives, but this is stuff that we really need to figure out and get straight. We need a baseline of knowledge as a community here, and this is our contribution to that. So you can learn more at psychedelicstoday.com, and if you want to go right to our site at psychedelicstoday.teachable.com. Kyle and I decided to raise some funds using Patreon, which is a really cool way to support the show because you can choose to donate a small portion of money monthly for certain prizes. We are allowing you guys access to interviews before they will ever hit the web. So, for instance, this Horizons episode, they've had that for a few days, and I believe there's some panel discussion stuff we've recorded and made available there. You'll probably also have access to some member or patron-only webinars. We also have rewards including t-shirts, stickers, mugs, access to our Navigating Psychedelics class, and much more. So check it out, patreon.com/psychedelics today, or you can get a link from our site, psychedelicstoday.com. If you want to look really cool in some Psychedelics Today gear, you really want to check out psychedelicstodayshop.com. We've got all sorts of cool stuff, from t-shirts to mugs to shower curtains and pillows. So you check it out. Any small purchase helps, even if it's just some stickers. We got some cool stickers there. Check it out, psychedelicstodayshop.com. Tell your friends, maybe buy some presents for this upcoming, what do you guys call it, Black Friday? Yeah, Black Friday, maybe that. Or maybe it's a Christmas present or whatever. We would love you guys to check out some of our stuff there and support the show. Thanks.